This is Antic, the AtariAge podcast.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Gardner Pomper was president and co-founder of Games Computers Play. Games Computers Play was almost certainly the first graphical online service, except for maybe Play-Doh, depending on how you're counting. It was devoted exclusively to interactive multiplayer games, and it was only available for Atari computers. You probably didn't get a chance to use Games Computers Play. It only managed to get about 1,000 subscribers at its peak. But you may have seen the colorful, enticing advertisement that they ran in the Atari magazines, or read the article about the service in Antic Magazine. If you don't remember them or never saw them, I encourage you to take a look at the ad and article. There are links in the show notes at ataripodcast.com. A word about the source code mentioned in this interview. As of the day I'm recording this, they haven't found it yet, but they believe they have it and are still looking. I'll let you know if and when they uncover it. This interview took place January 28, 2015, over Skype. Enjoy this interview with Gardner Pomper.
I have to admit, I was quite surprised to get that email from you. I was having a hard time understanding why there would be a podcast about 8-bit Ataris.
There are 3 podcasts about 8-bit Ataris.
Really?
Plus someone just started another one specifically about the Atari 7800 game system. So
okay.
There's kind of an active retro computing community. And podcast is kind of seems to have become how people get their news and entertainment now about old computers.
So why are people, why is there a retro computing community?
I can't speak for everybody. I think computers have become a commodity now, and they are tools. And there was a time when computers were thrilling and new, and they're not anymore. And I think for some of us, it's fun to play with a computer that you can literally, if you wanted to, learn everything about.
Well, it is funny that you say that, because that's I have a poster I made up at work that I have titled "When Computers Were Fun," and they have pictures of my first dozen computers. And I've often argued, that I'm not sure how kids really get into computers nowadays, because it's all so abstract.
Yeah.
I really liked the Commodore PET when I first got it, because I was an electrical engineer and I could have built the computer. Mm-hmm. So I knew all the hardware, I knew all the software, and it was really cool. So I understand that feeling. It's just I wouldn't want to use them anymore, because I can do more stuff with the newer computers.
That's true.
So, do you guys actually use Ataris, or do you just talk about them?
We use them. I mean, I personally have 3 on my desk, and the other people I podcast with have them. Many of the listeners, they'll either have one or they'll use an emulator, so they can kind of simulate the thing on their modern computer.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, I would like to talk about Games Computers Play.
Okay.
As far as I know, Games Computers Play was probably the first graphical online service, maybe with the exception of Play-Doh. So I kind of want to know about how it came about. Where did the idea come from, and how did you create it? I'd like to hear the story.
Okay. Well, so far as I know, also it was the first online graphical gaming system. Where it came from was when I was in college. I had a friend of mine, Greg Hogg, and we were in the wargaming club. And he was the one who convinced me to buy that first computer.
Okay.
And immediately, the computer seemed like it would be a great aid to games.
Is a wargaming club like Risk, that sort of thing, or?
Yeah, Risk, Diplomacy, Wooden Ships and Iron Men,
Okay.
All those board games.
Mm-hmm.
Then, of course, we also played D&D and things like that. So we use the computer to aid in all these games, dice rolling, generating maps, characters, all that sort of stuff that people did with computers.
Yeah.
And one of the things was that it's always hard to play a multiplayer game with a board game. Everybody's got to be there at the same time, and somebody's got to moderate, and everybody sees everything, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So we went, I graduated in 1978.
From where?
Virginia Tech.
Okay.
And went off, got a job at Rockwell doing hardware design and switched over to software. And then I went to work for a robotics company. And at that time, with TimeNet and CompuServe coming along, we decided that the next thing people were going to do is take what you could do on a personal computer with graphics in games and make a multiplayer service out of it. We decided we had to do that like right away before everybody else did it, to get in there at the beginning. That was probably our big mistake, because nobody else did it for another 20 years. So I don't think that we needed to be in quite as much of a rush as we were.
Right.
But that was the idea, was that you could do all the graphics on your personal computers, but that the games could all be resident on a central host so that everybody would share in the same games. And we did a number to start with that were just, simple, like whoever's online at the time. Cyber Tank was one of them, while we were working on what we really wanted to do, which was Lords of Space.
Okay.
Because the idea there was that it was an ongoing game that continued even when you weren't playing. So you would go and colonize a planet. You'd set up mines and oil derricks, and they would produce ore and oil when you were offline. Whenever you logged back in, they would, have extra stuff that they produced for you. You'd get reports if people attacked your planets.
So Lords of Space was your killer app that you were going for.
Yeah, that was the real reason that we did the whole system. Although we did add in all of the other frills, email, because we wanted to be able to, like I said, email out when people attacked your planets. In today's world, we would have an app that you get notifications on your phone if something was going on in the game. And we had downloads because we had to be able to download, the updates and things for the game. So we had that whole infrastructure that we ended up having to build up. But the real reason was, as Greg and I always called it, was the game. We wanted an ongoing, infinitely large universe, continuing, massively multiplayer space game. And that's pretty much what we had. We had at our peak, we had just over 1,000 people playing in the one game.
Is that how many subscribers you had?
Pretty much. Almost everybody played Lords of Space. We were limited to about a dozen simultaneous, because the communications were always the big problem. The price structure was such that we had to have a certain number of hours, at which point the price would flatten out, and we never quite made it, so we always were paying the maximum amount that we could possibly pay in order to support the TimeNet service.
Right. So you mean you were paying for the TimeNet network so people could connect to you
Yes.
They dial a local number, which would then connect you via packet switching, I assume, to your mainframe, which was in, what, Pennsylvania?
Yes. Yes, it was a Charles River Data Systems UNOS real-time Unix mini computer. And so anyway, we were really happy about the whole thing, except that we were a bit too early and couldn't really get the financing to keep it going long enough. One of the difficulties we'd had was explaining to people what it was we were doing. People would call up and say, "So you sell games over the phone?" It's like, well, no. So again, it was, I think, another symptom of just us being a bit too early.
Right. That's funny, because when I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but when I saw the I was a kid, I saw the ads. I had probably been on BBSs by then. I understood exactly what it was.
Yes.
It was CompuServe, but with graphics and games, and so.
Yes. When we did it, we thought it would be clear. We were surprised at the percentage of calls that we got. I think that we were starting to pull in the people who played games who didn't do the CompuServe things, which would have been good. It's sort of silly, but my biggest regret is that we never ended up with any screen captures from the Atari ST version that have gotten preserved anywhere, because the graphics looked so much better on the ST version.
I didn't know. Well, that was going to be my next question. I thought there was only an Atari 8-bit version.
No, there was an Atari ST version. What happened is, again, with timing issues, when we started development, the Atari was, $1,200 computer. By the time we released the game, the Atari was a $200 computer, which meant that the people buying them were not necessarily the people who would afford to pay $6 an hour to play a game.
Right.
So what we decided was that we were going to have to, move it to more powerful machines, and probably the IBM PC, which did not have graphics to begin with when we started, so we didn't pick that one. But we could see the direction that things were going, that the people with money were buying those. So we ported our client to Digital Research's GEM operating system, because that was available on the ST and on the IBM PC. So we got that out, but then we didn't have the money to advertise in IBM computer magazines, or even in the ST magazines. So it ended up just being that in order to sustain our growth, we were going to have to buy a bigger mini computer, and we just didn't have the money to do that, and the advertising and all the. Basically, we were all working for free at that point, pretty much. But we couldn't scale up. So
there was the 8-bit version and the ST version, and that was it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. After we folded up, my partner Greg, just for his own amusement, did port the client over to the IBM PC. But somewhere in various computer crashes, that code has been lost.
So when you say we were working for free, how many of us were we?
Well, there was a total of 5. There was myself and Greg. We had an office manager. I brought one of my coworkers from the robotics company, and Greg had another roommate from college who we brought in as a game designer, and he was the one who did Cybertank. So it was 5 of us at that point. So
can you give me a timeline when the service launched and when it shut down? To help you out on this, your LinkedIn says you were president of the company from November 83 through July 86.
Well, that's probably wrong then. I'm always fuzzy on dates. I was taking a look around, and it looks like we must have shut down in February of 87.
Okay.
And 83 is probably correct. We probably formed the company in like November of 83.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we must have gone online early in 85. Because there's a review in Antic from like December of 85.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember when exactly we went online, but it was, probably at least 6 months before that. But I do know that it took us far longer to get it up and running than we, thought we were going to take. I guess, everybody learns that about writing software.
Yes.
But we were young and foolish, and we didn't know it couldn't be done, so we went ahead and did it.
Nice. You blazed a trail. Did you lose a lot of money on this?
Oh, yes. Yes. Even apart from not making any money, we had some investors. I had some family money. Mm-hmm. And yes, we lost a fair amount of money on this. I don't know. I really don't know exactly how much, but probably in the, $200,000-$300,000 range.
Wow.
So, but it was a great experience, and ever since, I have always had in the back of my mind trying to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
But I have never really been able to figure out a way of making money on it.
Yeah.
It would be so much easier now than it was back then. There are just so many tools and things, and it's just that people would no longer be satisfied with the level of graphics that
Right.
I would put together.
Right.
I'd have to have an artist.
Why did you launch it on the Atari as opposed to the Commodore, or why didn't you also do a Commodore client? Why did you choose the Atari? I guess is my question.
Basically, we chose the Atari because it was a relatively new, relatively expensive home gaming machine.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of a choice between the Atari and the Apple.
Mm-hmm.
But we kind of felt like the Apple was heading out as sort of like more exclusive, more business as they were heading for. So we thought that the Atari would be better on the gaming front. The Commodore just seemed to be kind of lower end.
Mm-hmm.
And again, our factoring in was we were going to have to charge hourly to play this game.
Right.
So we were looking for people who had disposable income.
Right.
We would have picked the IBM, except, like I said, when it started, there were no graphics on the IBM.
Right. So the article in Antic said that the Games Computers Play costs only $6 an hour.
Yes.
In today's dollars, that's kind of a lot. Only $6 an hour from 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. and throughout the weekend, and the weekday prime time, which I assume that's when Telenet or TimeNet was charging you more bucks, was $15 an hour.
Yes.
Plus a $30 sign-up fee, which got you some online time.
Right. It basically got you 5 hours, $30 worth of online time.
Mm-hmm.
So the game technically didn't cost you anything, for the download, for the box and the discs and things.
Right.
And those prices were pretty much chosen because that's what TimeNet charged us.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't make any money.
Wow.
Off of it. The pricing structure, like I said, was at a certain point TimeNet went to a flat fee and they didn't charge anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So our whole goal was to try to get enough hours that we would hit that, and then the $6 an hour would then come to us.
Right.
And we could never generate that volume. We got very close.
Wow. Just everyone gets paid before you, and then you just never got there. That had
Yes.
to kind of be painful.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was. We worked all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but there were just so many cool things that we did. My wife, who I didn't have a wife at that point, or I wouldn't have been able to work 100 hours a week for 4 years. My wife always kicks me about not having patented any of the things that we did. But even today, I'm still in basically back-end software development. And even today, I'm still trying to reuse things that we did back then that would be beneficial to do now, and people still don't do them. Are all the communication schemes that we had, the chat rooms and things like that. If you're familiar with Jabber, right, or these sort of things, it's the same sort of concept that they use, except we use them for the game programs that communicate with each other, in addition to the people communicating with each other. We had a central message handler, that did all that interpersonal and inter-process communication. We had a universe that generated itself as you explored, so it was effectively infinite in size. We developed, so far as I know, the first sliding windows compressed communication protocol to handle the communication down to the client, so that we could do this sort of stuff over a 300 baud modem.
Was latency much of an issue?
It really was not. Much of an issue, but then again, people didn't have the expectations they have nowadays.
Sure.
When one of the things about the system was that you had the little robot that you controlled with your joystick, and other people also had the little robots, and you would see them moving around your screen, but they didn't move smoothly. They sort of jumped, like 2 or 3 blocks across, but it was still, kind of amazing to just watch people go. You could see how crowded the system was because you could see people wandering by. We had little private rooms that you could go in, and like they'd buzz the doorbell, and you'd decide whether to open the door and let them in, and then you'd lock, and then you'd close it again. So you'd have private conversations like somebody knocking on your office door. All this stuff was done with no commands. Nobody had to learn anything, right? You just clicked on a telephone to call somebody, or you clicked on a door to ring the doorbell. So, we're quite proud of it. We're really kind of sorry that it seems to have been completely forgotten. And there's the Wikipedia has an entry on it that's just, humiliating. Something about beheading robots or things.
That's what I was going to ask you about. I actually couldn't remember where I read it. It must have been on the Wikipedia months ago. So the story, as I recall, and I would like your verification, was that there was a room you could go into to change your avatar, and you could take off your head and put it on the table or whatever, and then at that moment someone else could come in and steal your head.
Absolutely not true at all. When you logged into when you first logged in, there was your screen would show like a big door, and it would slide open, and then there would be the customs office, and there's a desk there, and over on the left-hand side there was an array of avatars that you could pick.
Okay.
You'd go over to whatever avatar you wanted, and you'd click your button, and your avatar would change to that one. That's it. No detachable heads. Nobody's stealing anything from you. You could just go over and pick whatever avatar you wanted. So yes, I have occasionally thought about trying to figure out how to get that entry updated, but again, it never really occurred to me that anybody really looking at it.
I'm sure one of our listeners will correct it and cite this interview as the source of
that would be great. And I'm perfectly happy to connect it and cite it as the president and co-founder, but I don't know that they believe me.
Do you still have any of the code, like the server source code or anything?
We do have a printout of the server source code, I believe, but we don't seem to have the client source code anymore.
Well, people still have the clients on disk, so I'm sure if someone was really motivated, they could decompile it.
I mean, technically, it ought to run on one of the emulators, I suppose.
Right. Have you, or would you be willing to share the server source code?
I can certainly talk to Greg. I think he has it. I believe he only has it in printed form.
That's fine.
There would be a lot of typing. We printed it out in like a compressed 2-column format, and it's probably, it fills one of these, 4-inch binders. Mm-hmm. It would be a lot of typing.
We could, I would, in addition to doing interviews, the other thing I do is try to preserve artifacts from Atari products back in the day that haven't been preserved before. And I would love to scan that, or have Greg scan it, or whatever's easiest for you guys. If we could just scan it 300 DPI, throw it up on archive.org, and then if someone wants to type it in or OCR it or whatever, or just look at it and see how it was done, that would just be amazing.
Well, I'll certainly talk to him. I don't have it because I am well known for losing anything you give me. So he's always been the one who preserves that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I can certainly, contact him and ask if he's willing to do that. We certainly aren't going to claim any kind of intellectual property rights.
I already know you didn't patent anything. So.
We didn't patent anything. So, which actually, it's just, I joke about it. I wouldn't have patented it anyway. I really don't believe in software patents. But yeah. So I will certainly let him know. And if any of your listeners ever happened to have played the Atari ST version in the couple months it was available, mm-hmm. and took a screenshot of it, I would dearly love to have that.
All right, we'll put the call out. See what they have to say. Do you still have an Atari?
No, I'm afraid that all I've done is, kept the poster. I've owned, I'm not even sure how many, 30 computers by this point. Mm-hmm. And we move too often. It just, I would love to have them. I kind of do regret having gotten rid of them, because you're perfectly right in saying that they were a lot more fun back then.
If you could send a message to the Atari community that still exists, and you can right now, what would you tell them? You're going to be like, why didn't you subscribe to my service?
Yeah, I'm afraid that's the first thing that pops to mind. That's not really very helpful. Just, whoever it was, who did subscribe and play it, I really hope they enjoyed it, and it was one of the highlights of my life, building and running that, and I just wish that it could have lasted. Yeah,
it seems like it. I'm sorry I never even got to see it. It seems like it was a really cool, cutting-edge toy.
Yeah, I do. Like I said, after we folded up, I kept deciding, well, I still want to play this, and I waited decades for somebody to do it. Mm-hmm. And they're now online, but they have gone the first-person shooter route. Yeah. It's like, okay, I'm still waiting for that online infinite universe strategy type game to play.
So we talked about Lords of Space, right? Mm-hmm. And that was your big app. What are some of the little apps that people could play? You mentioned something about a tank, and tell me about the other games that were available.
Cyber Tank was also quite popular, mm-hmm. and that was basically a game where you could build your own tank, sort of like Ogre. If you remember Ogre?
No, I don't.
Okay. Anyway, but a big cybernetic type tank, and you would just go out onto this battlefield and you'd shoot all the other tanks. The key things in there was that you actually got to kind of design the tank and build it up graphically. Mm-hmm. And you could then play against multiple people. We knew that we're not developing games as quickly as our audience would like, so we basically just changed the graphics, and we made a version called Cyber Ship that was not much of a success. But we had that. We had another one called BioWar It was essentially a multiplayer version of the Conway's Game of Life.
Okay.
Quite abstract. There were a few people that played it, but honestly, almost everybody who came ended up playing Lords of Space or just wandering around the city and doing chatting with other people.
And then the other thing it looks like was the city where that's the wander around chatting part, right? Where you can go to the games room, the customs office, the post office.
Yes.
Okay.
That was sort of the top level menu and the chat capabilities, and you could, you would just type on your keyboard and it would automatically send it to everybody who was nearby, essentially in the same room. And so if you saw people in some other room somewhere, you would just walk over to them and start talking.
Do you have any Easter eggs? Did you have any problems with hackers? Any weirdness? Any
No,
weird stories?
the only weirdness we had was that there was a bug in Lords of Space at one point, because in addition to attacking other people and mining ore, you could essentially buy yourself a space station and become the central trader where people would buy and sell things from you. Well, there was a bug where there was an overflow, and the more stuff you bought, the more money you made, because it turned negative. And the person who found it spread it around a little bit without letting us know.
Nice.
That was the one time that we had to essentially reboot the game, because we couldn't unroll that back. Right. In terms of hacking, we didn't really have a problem with that because the game logic was actually on the central computer. The client program was exactly the same for all the games and the city. It was essentially equivalent to a web browser. Right. That it had certain intelligent commands that it could do, but it was not game specific. So by having the game on the central server, we kind of didn't have to worry about cheating. And
if you wanted to add a new game, they wouldn't have to download anything new. It was just
right. It made writing the games much easier, considering we had such a small staff.
It seems very advanced for the time, just advanced thinking of how to handle that problem.
I really hurt my shoulder patting myself on the back about we were very happy with all the technology that we developed. It was just that we were hackers and gamers. We weren't businessmen.
Yeah.
I expect that if we had somebody who was a businessman, he would have been able to raise funds.
Yeah.
But of course, York, Pennsylvania was not exactly the tech capital of the world anyway.
Right.
Might have been different if we had started this up in California.
Maybe. The founders of Optimized System Software, I think, told me the exact same thing. We were hackers and programmers. We were not businessmen.
Right.
And, same problem. And they were, I think, they were in more of a hub area. So
yes. I mean, many companies did that. I mean, look at all the early computer companies.
Yeah.
That all went by the wayside.
Right.
It's the skills don't necessarily go together. I ended up writing all the documentation, doing all the advertising, raising all the money, writing the client program, and writing Lords of Space. I was very busy.
I bet.
And I was just not good at the non-computer stuff.
Yeah. What haven't I asked you that I should have?
I don't know. You've been very nice letting me just ramble on and reminisce. The client program was written in a programming language called Action, which was a really, really cool. I don't remember who wrote it.
OSS. Yeah.
OSS wrote Action.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, they published it. They
if they're still around, I'm really impressed. It was like a mini C compiler, which was way more efficient than the C compilers. So, that was really helpful in doing that. One last little bit, which I probably shouldn't even say. because it was all hubris. Games Computers Play, the name, was picked partly because those are my initials.
Oh, there you go.
So
nice.
little egomania there.
Nice. And speaking of that, I want to make sure I pronounce your name right. It's Gardner Pomper, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Gardner Pomper, and Greg Hogg deserves, also a lot of the credit. He was essentially my other half.
Right. So what did he do? You told me what you did. What did he do?
He wrote basically all of the system stuff, all of the email, the post office, the bulletin boards, all of the system support type functions. And he was also my sounding board and the guy who made things actually work. We were quite a good team. I basically would come up with these radical new ideas, but once I figured out how it was supposed to work, I kind of lost interest. And he would make sure that I got it to the point where he could, get it rock solid. So we worked very well as a team.
Nice. And you guys are still in contact, clearly. Yes,
we are still in contact. And as I say, every now and then we talk about, we should do this again.
You just keep bashing your head against the wall. Eventually, it'll stop hurting.
Well, eventually, maybe we'll be retired and we won't need income anymore.
Right.
And if I don't need income, then this is on my list of the type of thing that I would want to do in my spare time.
So what do you do today for income or just for fun?
I guess, for work, I guess you'd call me a software architect, except I still write a lot of the code. I do this same sort of back-end systems and communications and, cloud computing and all that sort of stuff. And for fun, I dream about going sailing. I don't actually do it. I just dream of it.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you for contacting me. And I guess I will have to listen to a podcast.
Yes, you will have to listen.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Gardner.
Bye.